The siren cut out, leaving only the low, vibrating hum of the cruiser's engine. A flashlight beam dragged across the cracked pavement, halting on a pair of scuffed tennis shoes. Authority isn't loud. It's the heavy, quiet silence, right before the hammer drops on a fool's ego. The August humidity in the city didn't just hang in the air. It grabbed you by the throat the second you stepped out of air conditioning. Maya Brooks felt it instantly, a wet, heavy blanket, settling over her shoulders as she pushed open the glass door of the corner bodega. The bell above tinkled a fragile, cheap sound that was immediately swallowed by the grind of a garbage truck lumbering down 43rd Street. She held a lukewarm coffee in a paper cup that was already softening at the bottom. She was off the clock. Her knees ached. A dull, throbbing pulse settled right behind her right eye, the kind of headache born from 6 hours of budget meetings in a fluorescent-lit conference room that smelled of old carpet and ozone. Today she wasn't the chief of police. She was just a 48-year-old woman in faded grey sweatpants, an oversized navy blue hoodie, and a pair of New Balance sneakers that had seen better decades. Her dark locks were pulled back into an untidy bun, held together by a fraying hair tie. Maya stepped up to the curb. The pedestrian light was solid red, an unblinking plastic eye. She looked left. She looked right. The street was dead, save for a crumpled food wrapper tumbling lazily across the asphalt in the stagnant breeze. She didn't wait for the white walking figure to permit her passage. She stepped off the curb, her soles compressing against the sticky sun-baked tar. A sharp, synthetic chirp tore through the heavy air. Maya froze, her right foot resting on the double yellow line. The sound was a reflex trigger, a noise deeply embedded in her nervous system after 25 years on the force. It was the quick blast of a police cruiser's siren, the "Hey You" button. She turned her head slowly. The cruiser had nosed out of an alley half a block down, rolling silently to a stop just a few feet from where she stood. The engine idled with a deep, rhythmic vibration. The driver's side door popped open, the hinges groaning slightly. A maintenance issue she mentally flagged with an irritated twitch of her jaw. Out stepped a patrolman. He was young, maybe 24, with the kind of tight, high-and-fade haircut that screamed fresh out of the academy. His uniform was crisp, almost painfully so, but he wore it with a manufactured swagger. He hooked his thumbs into his duty belt, a gesture Maya had corrected in rookies 1,000 times. It restricted hand movement. It was a lazy, arrogant posture designed to intimidate, not protect. "Excuse me," the cop said. His voice was a flat, nasal drawl projecting across the quiet street. "You in a rush somewhere?" Maya let out a slow breath through her nose. The smell of the bodega's stale frying oil lingered in her nostrils, now mixing with the sharp scent of spearmint gum. The cop was aggressively chewing. "Just heading home, officer," she said, her tone level, stripped of any inflection. She took a sip of her coffee. It was burnt, the lights red. He pointed a rigid finger at the pedestrian signal. "Or maybe you missed that." Maya looked at the light, then back at him. She noted the nameplate pinned to his chest. Miller. The brass was slightly tarnished at the edges. His collar was missing a stay, causing the left tip to curl upward. "It's completely empty, Officer Miller," Maya said, keeping her voice in the lower registers. She didn't want a confrontation. She wanted to take off her shoes and sit in the dark. Miller took 2 steps forward, closing the distance. The leather of his belt creaked. "I didn't ask for a traffic report. I asked if you missed the light." He stopped an arm's length away, looking her up and down. His eyes tracked over her baggy sweats, her worn sneakers, the complete lack of visible status. Maya knew the look. It was the rapid calculus of a cop deciding what kind of citizen he was dealing with. He saw a middle-aged black woman in cheap clothes walking alone on a Tuesday afternoon. He saw an easy target for a power trip. "I saw the light," Maya said. She shifted her weight, feeling the twinge of an old cartilage tear in her left knee. "I assessed the intersection. It was clear. I crossed." Miller's jaw worked the gum. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You assessed the intersection. That's good. That's really good. You're a traffic engineer now." A hot spike of irritation pierced Maya's exhaustion. The familiar, ugly reality of the uniform she dedicated her life to was standing right in front of her, wrapped in unearned authority. She knew the statistics. She read the civilian complaint reports every Friday morning at 8 a.m. But reading about the friction of the streets on paper was different from feeling the heat of it radiating off a rookie cop's chest. She could end this. A single word, a flash of leather, and Miller would pale, stammer, and shrink. But a dark, cynical part of her held back. She wanted to see how far he would take it. She wanted to know exactly what kind of officers her academy was turning loose on the pavement. "No," Maya said quietly. "Just a pedestrian trying to drink her coffee." "Step up onto the sidewalk," Miller commanded, dropping the conversational tone. It was an order now. He unhooked his right thumb from his belt, letting his hand rest casually near the grip of his taser. Maya stared at the hand. The texture of the molded plastic grip, the bright yellow casing. A cold knot formed in her stomach. It wasn't fear, it was profound disappointment. She complied, stepping backward onto the concrete curb, her sneakers scuffing the edge. "Set the coffee down," Miller instructed, his eyes narrowing. "It's just coffee," Maya said. "I don't care if it's holy water. Set it on the hood of the car." Maya walked over to the cruiser. She placed the paper cup on the white-painted metal. The hood was radiating heat, smelling vaguely of baked dust and engine fluid. She turned back to face him, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. "ID," Miller said, snapping his fingers once. Maya stood completely still. The street traffic from the adjacent avenue was a dull, rhythmic ocean sound, punctuated by the occasional blast of an air horn. Closer, the static hiss of Miller's shoulder radio crackled. A female voice mumbled a 10-4 through the distortion. Maya recognized the cadence. It was Jenkins on dispatch. She knew Jenkins's voice better than she knew the voices of some of her own cousins. "I said ID," Miller repeated his voice, taking on a harder, sharper edge. The smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped mask of enforcement. He stepped into her personal space, using his height to loom. Maya looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the bead of sweat tracing the line of his jaw. She saw the slight tremor of adrenaline in his fingers. He wasn't scared. He was high on the friction. He was enjoying the mundane dominance of the stop. "For jaywalking?" Maya asked. Her voice remained devoid of emotion, a flat, calm surface over a boiling pot. "For failing to obey a traffic control device, and for matching the description of a suspect involved in a petty larceny 2 blocks from here?" Miller lied without missing a beat. It was a smooth, practiced lie, the kind of lie a cop uses to establish probable cause out of thin air. Maya felt a sour taste flood her mouth. Larceny. The audacity of it made her jaw clench so hard her teeth ground together. She patted the pockets of her hoodie. The thick cotton was worn soft. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled receipt, a loose quarter, and finally the rough leather of her civilian wallet. She pulled it out. It was a cheap brown bifold. She flipped it open and extracted her driver's license, the rigid plastic snapping sharply against her thumb. She held it out. Miller snatched it from her fingers. He held it up to the sun, squinting at the holographic overlay, then looked down at her photo. "Maya Brooks," he read aloud, dragging the syllables out. You live over in Westbridge, Maya. That's a pretty nice zip code for someone wandering around in pajamas." The subtle venom in his tone wasn't lost on her. Westbridge was an affluent neighborhood. The implication hung heavy in the humid air. "You don't belong there, and you don't belong here. I pay my taxes," Maya said softly. She crossed her arms over her chest. The wind picked up, blowing a stray piece of grit into her eye, but she didn't blink. She kept her gaze locked on his face. Miller scoffed. He tapped the license against his chin. "Yeah, I'm sure you do. You got any warrants, Maya? Anything going to pop up when I run this?" "Run it and find out," she replied. Miller's eyes darkened. The defiance, however quiet, irritated him. He expected a shuffle. He expected nervousness, wide eyes, maybe a plea to let her go with a warning. Maya's absolute stillness threw off his script. "Oh, I'm going to—" Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "Turn around. Face the vehicle. Hands flat on the hood." Maya didn't move. The internal war between the tired civilian and the chief of police tore at her. If she turned around and put her hands on the hot metal, she was participating in the charade. She was validating his abuse of power. If she pulled her badge now, it would be a reactionary defense, a shield used only when the fire got too hot. "I am not placing my hands on the car," Maya said. Her voice was no longer flat. It carried the dense, gravelly weight of a command. Miller blinked, taken aback for a fraction of a second before his ego rushed back in to fill the void. "Listen to me very carefully." He stepped closer, his chest almost brushing hers. The smell of the gum was nauseatingly sweet. "You are bordering on resisting. You do not want to catch a charge today. Turn around." He reached out his thick hand, gripping her left bicep. His fingers dug into the cotton of her hoodie. A visceral shock-wave of anger hit Maya. It started in her chest and burned outward to her fingertips. The physical contact crossed an invisible sacred line. He was putting hands on a civilian who had shown zero physical aggression. She looked down at his hand, gripping her arm. Then she looked up at his face. Her eyes were dead, cold pools. "Take your hand off me," Maya said. The words weren't loud, but they cut through the humid air like a straight razor. Miller tightened his grip. "Or what you're going to file a complaint. Get in line." Maya felt the heavy metallic weight of her secondary wallet resting in the deep inner pocket of her sweatpants. The badge wallet. The gold shield that dictated the careers, pensions, and lives of the 2,000 sworn officers in the city, including the boy currently digging his nails into her arm. She didn't yank her arm away. She didn't struggle. She simply exhaled a long, tired breath that carried the weight of decades of systemic rot she had tried and apparently failed to scrub out of her department. "Officer Miller," Maya said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that forced him to lean in slightly to hear her. "You have exactly 3 seconds to remove your hand from my arm before I end your career, before it even begins." Miller let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Is that right?" he sneered. "And who exactly are you supposed to be? The mayor?" Maya slowly, deliberately reached her free right hand toward the waistband of her sweatpants. Miller's reaction was instantaneous. His free hand dropped from his taser and slapped down onto the retention hood of his service weapon. "Hey, keep your hand where I can see it. Pull it out slow. I'm reaching for my identification," Maya said, her voice eerily calm despite the sudden escalation. The metallic click of Miller unfastening his holster strap sounded like a gunshot in the quiet street. "I already have your ID," Miller yelled, his voice cracking slightly with sudden panic. "You have my driver's license." Maya corrected her fingers, closing around the thick leather of her badge wallet. You're about to see the ID that matters." The movement was painfully slow. Maya didn't jerk her hand or make a sudden aggressive motion that could be interpreted as a threat. She navigated the exact terrifying tightrope that every black citizen in the city knew by muscle memory. Her fingers found the smooth, worn leather of the case in her pocket. She gripped it, feeling the solid heavy metal concealed inside, and pulled it free. It was a standard bifold detective's wallet. Black leather frayed at the stitched seams from years of being shoved into pockets and slammed onto desks. Miller's hand remained glued to his unclasped holster, his knuckles white. The veins in his neck stood out like thick cords. He was breathing through his mouth, shallow and fast, the smell of artificial spearmint now completely overpowered by the sour, sharp tang of pure adrenaline. He was ready to pull his weapon. He wanted to. Maya saw it in the twitch of his eye, that terrifying, desperate urge to maintain control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers. She flipped the leather wallet open with a flick of her wrist. There was no blinding flash of light, no cinematic music, just the dull, heavy clink of the solid gold shield hitting the opposite side of the leather flap. The badge caught the harsh, hazy afternoon sunlight. It wasn't the standard silver shield of a patrolman, nor the gold-plated star of a captain. It was a dense, intricate piece of metal, topped with an eagle, the center seal surrounded by blue enamel lettering. Chief of Police. Underneath it, her police identification card. Her face, stern and professional, in full dress uniform, stared back at him. Maya held it steady, right at his eye level. She didn't say a word. She let the silence do the work. Miller stared at the leather case. For 2 full seconds, his brain simply refused to process the visual information. The cognitive dissonance was too vast. The woman in the baggy, faded sweatpants with the messy bun and the cheap New Balance sneakers could not be the apex of his chain of command. It was a mathematical impossibility. Then the realization hit. It didn't wash over him. It struck him like a physical blow to the sternum. Maya watched the exact moment his reality shattered. The blood abandoned the capillaries in his cheeks, draining away to leave a splotchy, sickly pallor. The aggressive manufactured swagger evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified 20-something boy wearing a uniform that suddenly looked 2 sizes too big. The grip on her bicep vanished. Miller snatched his hand back as if her cotton hoodie had burst into open flames. He took a clumsy, staggering step backward, his heel catching on a crack in the pavement. He nearly lost his balance, his arms flailing for a brief, undignified second before he righted himself. Miller started. His voice was entirely different now. It was thin, reedy, stripped of its artificial bass. Chief Brooks. Ma'am. I didn't. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. His hand finally fell away from his holster, hanging uselessly at his side. He looked at the badge again, then at her face, his eyes wide and panicked, searching for some sort of punchline to a joke he didn't understand. "You didn't what Officer Miller?" Maya asked. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. The anger had receded, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. This was the voice she used during disciplinary hearings. "You didn't realize who you were illegally detaining." "No, ma'am, He stammered, wiping a sudden sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "I was just, the light was red, and you crossed, and I was just doing a routine." "A routine stop," Maya finished for him. She lowered the badge wallet, but didn't put it away. "A routine stop where you corner a pedestrian in an empty intersection, where you manufacture a petty larceny suspect description out of thin air to establish probable cause, where you lay hands on a non-violent, non-resisting civilian." "Ma'am, the larceny we had a call over on, "Stop," Maya said. The word was a heavy stone dropping into a still pond. "Do not insult my intelligence by continuing to lie. We both know there was no larceny call matching my description. You saw a tired, middle-aged black woman in sweatpants who didn't wait for a little white light to tell her to cross an empty street, and you decided to have some fun." Miller opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The air had been completely sucked out of his lungs. The reality of his situation was crashing down around him in heavy, suffocating waves. He was standing on a hot, sticky street corner, his career currently bleeding out on the asphalt. "You asked if I was going to file a complaint," Maya said, stepping off the curb and closing the distance he had just created. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You told me to get in line. Chief, please," Miller whispered. The sheer desperation in his voice was pathetic. It made Maya's stomach turn. She didn't feel victorious. She felt a profound, exhausting sadness. This kid was a product of her academy. He sat in the classroom she oversaw. He swore the oath she administered. And the very first time he thought no one of consequence was looking, he used his badge as a weapon of intimidation. "Is this how you police my city, when you think the person you're shaking down has no power?" Maya asked, her dark eyes locking onto his. "Is this the friction you generate on a random Tuesday? Because if it is Miller, you are a liability. To me, to this department, and to the people paying your salary." She looked at his collar, still curled at the edge, the tarnished nameplate, the sloppy, aggressive posture he had completely abandoned. He was shaking. A fine, visible tremor ran through his hands. "I made a mistake," Miller choked out. "A terrible mistake. I didn't recognize you, Chief." Maya felt the throb behind her right eye pulse with sudden violence. That was the core of the rot. That, Maya said, her voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper, is exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to recognize me to treat me like a human being. She reached past him. Miller flinched, shrinking back as if expecting a strike. Maya ignored him. She reached through the open window of the cruiser and unhooked the microphone from the dashboard radio. The coiled wire of the radio mic stretched tight as Maya pulled it out of the window. The heavy plastic casing felt familiar and hot in her palm. The cruiser's engine hummed against her hip, a steady vibration that contrasted with the complete stillness of the street around them. Even the city seemed to be holding its breath. Miller stood frozen on the sidewalk. He looked like a man who had just watched his house burn to the ground, entirely unable to comprehend the ashes. The sweat on his face had gathered in the hollows of his cheeks, dripping slowly onto his stiff blue collar. Maya pressed the push-to-talk button on the side of the microphone. The radio chirped a short burst of static that cut through the humid air. "Dispatch, this is car unit." She paused, squinting at the black stenciled numbers on the side of Miller's front quarter panel. "Car unit 412. Clear the air." For 3 seconds there was nothing but the crackle of dead air. Then the voice of Jenkins, the dispatcher, came through the speaker. It wasn't the bored, monotone drawl from earlier. Jenkins had recognized the voice immediately. Maya Brooks didn't use the radio often, but when she did, every officer in a 50-mile radius shut up and listened. "Air is cleared for 4 to 12. Go ahead." "Chief." Jenkins's voice wavered, slightly confused as to why the chief of police was keying up from a rookie's patrol car in the middle of the 4th precinct. "Jenkins, I need the duty captain for the 4th to my location immediately." Maya commanded, her tone flat and uncompromising. "Code 2. No sirens, just get them here." "Copy that, Chief. Stand by." Maya released the button. She tossed the microphone back onto the driver's seat. It landed with a dull thud against the worn upholstery. She turned back to Miller. He hadn't moved an inch. "Step away from the vehicle," Maya ordered. Miller blinked. "Mom." I said, "Step away from the vehicle. Go stand by that lamppost." She pointed to a rusted iron pole 10 feet away. Miller moved like a machine with a dying battery. He shuffled over to the lamppost and stood there, staring blankly at the sidewalk. He didn't lean against it. He just stood, his arms hanging, completely defeated. Maya walked over to the hood of the cruiser and picked up her coffee. She took a sip. It was entirely cold now, tasting aggressively like wet cardboard and burnt beans. She didn't care. She drank it anyway, welcoming the bitter taste. It matched her mood. They waited in silence for 8 minutes. To Maya, it was a moment to rest her aching knees. To Miller, she knew it was an eternity of psychological waterboarding. Every passing second was a hammer chipping away at his impending doom. A couple walking a golden retriever on the opposite side of the street paused, sensing the bizarre, tense tableau. A young cop standing at attention, like a scolded child, while a woman in sweatpants leaned against his cruiser, drinking coffee. Maya caught their eye and gave a small, polite nod. They hurried away. The sound of approaching tires finally broke the silence. A sleek, unmarked black SUV turned the corner and accelerated down the street, braking sharply to pull up bumper to bumper with the patrol car. The driver's door swung open before the SUV was fully in park. Captain Hayes stepped out. He was a large man, pushing 55, with a thick neck, a salt and pepper mustache, and a uniform that looked like it had been ironed with a laser. He was a precinct commander who ran his house tight. Hayes took one look at the scene. He saw Miller standing by the lamppost, looking like a ghost. He saw the cruiser door open, and then he saw Maya Brooks leaning against the hood in her oversized hoodie, her badge wallet now resting openly on the white metal beside her coffee cup. Hayes's face tightened. He slammed his car door shut and jogged over his duty belt, jingling. "Chief Brooks," Hayes said, stopping 3 feet away and offering a crisp reflex salute that Maya ignored. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. "I got the call. What the hell is going on here?" Maya didn't push off the car. She kept her posture relaxed, an intentional contrast to the rigid tension of the two men. "Afternoon, Captain. Your officer here and I just had a very enlightening interaction." Hayes slowly turned his head to look at Miller. His eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Miller, what did you do?" Miller opened his mouth, but the words caught in his dry throat. He just shook his head, a pathetic, helpless gesture. Officer Miller decided to initiate a pedestrian stop. Maya said, her voice carrying clearly to where the young cop stood. "I crossed against the light. Empty intersection. He rolled up on me, demanded ID, and when I questioned the nature of the stop, he fabricated a petty larceny call to establish probable cause to detain me." Hayes's jaw dropped slightly. He looked back at Maya, absorbing the information. The color began to rise in his thick neck, a dark, angry red creeping over his collar. Fabricating a call was a firing offense. Doing it to a civilian was bad enough. Doing it to the chief of police was professional suicide. Maya continued, her voice growing colder, put his hands on me, grabbed my arm to physically compel me against the vehicle when I refused to blindly submit to an illegal detention. "Jesus Christ!" Hayes breathed out. He didn't look at Miller. He couldn't. If he looked at the rookie right now, Maya knew Hayes might physically throw him into the back of his own cruiser. He was operating under the assumption, Maya said, picking up her badge wallet and slipping it back into her sweatpants pocket, that because I am a black woman walking through Westbridge in sweatpants, I lacked the resources or the standing to hold him accountable. He was relying on the friction of the street to cover his ego. Maya finally pushed off the hood of the car. She stood up straight, rolling her shoulders to work out a knot of tension. She looked at Hayes, her eyes hard and unforgiving. "Strip him, Captain," Maya commanded quietly. Hayes stiffened. "Ma'am, take his weapon, take his shield, and take his keys. Put him in the back of your vehicle. He is suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation, effective immediately. And I want you to pull every single body cam footage file this kid has uploaded since he hit the street. Every traffic stop, every pedestrian interaction. If he did this to me on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, he's been doing it to people who can't fight back in the dark." Hayes nodded sharply. "Yes, Chief. Right away." Hayes turned and marched toward the lamp-post. The sound of his heavy boots on the pavement was the drumbeat of an execution. Maya watched as Hayes got in Miller's face. She couldn't hear the words, just the low, furious rumble of the captain's voice. She saw Miller's trembling hands unclip his radio, unfasten his gun belt, and hand over the heavy brass shield from his chest. Maya looked away. The headache was worse now. The pulsing behind her eye was a steady, rhythmic drum. She picked up her cold coffee and turned her back on the two men. She began walking down the street, her worn sneakers scuffing against the pavement, heading toward home. The street felt exactly as hot and oppressive as it had 20 minutes ago, but the air tasted distinctly of ash. The deadbolt on Maya's front door turned with a heavy, satisfying thunk. She pushed the heavy oak inward and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of her foyer. The air conditioning was set to 68 degrees, a sharp, artificial chill that raised goosebumps on her forearms, still damp from the residual humidity of the street. She shut the door and leaned her forehead against the cool, painted wood for a long moment. She didn't turn on the lights. The late afternoon sun filtered through the narrow transom window above the door, casting a long, slanted rectangle of dusty light across the hardwood floor. The adrenaline crash hit her then, not as a sudden drop, but as a slow, leaking puncture. Her left knee throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. She kicked off the New Balance sneakers, the worn soles scuffing against the entryway rug. She nudged them into the corner with her toe peeling off her athletic socks. The hardwood floor was cold against her bare arches. Maya walked into the kitchen, the house utterly silent except for the low, constant hum of the refrigerator. It smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner her housekeeper used on Mondays, and the stale, lingering scent of toast from that morning. She moved to the sink, turned the faucet to cold, and let the water run until it turned icy against her fingertips. She filled a tall glass and drank it in 3 long, continuous swallows. The water hit her empty stomach like a stone. She set the glass down on the granite counter. It left a ring of condensation. There was no sense of triumph. There was no righteous vindication warming her chest. The television cop shows always portrayed these moments as victories. The corrupt officer caught the badge, stripped the system purged of its bad apples. But reality was an entirely different, infinitely uglier beast. Maya walked into the living room and sank into the oversized leather armchair by the window. The leather groaned softly under her weight, releasing the trapped scent of old hide. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around her shins. She felt exhausted, a bone-deep weariness that a 12-hour sleep wouldn't touch. Miller hadn't recognized her. That was the phrase that kept looping in her head, a skipping record grating against her skull. "I didn't recognize you, Chief." It was the ultimate, devastating defense. He thought she was just a regular citizen. He thought she was nobody. And because he thought she was nobody, he felt entirely comfortable using the weight of the city, the threat of violence, and the fabrications of the law to put her in her place. If she had just been Maya Brooks, a 48-year-old accountant, or a nurse, walking home from a shift, what would have happened? She knew the answer. It sat heavy in her throat. She would have been pressed against the searing hood of that cruiser. She would have been handcuffed, thrown in the back, and booked on a fabricated resisting charge. She would have lost a day of her life in a holding cell smelling of urine and bleach bleeding money she might not have to a bail bondsman, all because a rookie cop was bored and wanted to feel big. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her sweatpants, a sharp, angry buzz against her thigh. She dug it out. The screen glared in the dim room, displaying the caller, I.D. Gregory, IAD. Captain Thomas Gregory ran internal affairs. He was a cynical chain-smoking pragmatist who trusted absolutely no one, which made him exceptionally good at his job. Maya swiped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. Brooks. Chief. Gregory's voice was a rough gravel grind over a cheap speaker. He sounded tired. Gregory always sounded tired. Hayes just dropped a package on my desk. Shield weapon and a very pale, very quiet kid named Miller. Hayes gave me the brief. Are you all right? I'm fine, Tom. Just a headache. I bet. The sound of a lighter flicking echoed through the receiver, followed by a long, slow exhale. I pulled his digital jacket, everything from the academy forward, and I had my techs immediately pull his bodycam uploads for the last 90 days. Maya rested her head back against the leather chair, staring at the ceiling fan. And it's exactly what you think it is. Maya, Gregory said, dropping the formal titles. The exhaustion in his voice matched her own. He's smart about it. He doesn't turn the camera off. He just escalates encounters with people who don't know their rights. He targets the homeless encampments under the viaduct. He pulls over beat-up sedans for failing to signal 300 feet before a turn. He creates friction, then charges them when they push back. We've got 4 resisting arrest charges on his sheet in the last 3 months. All of them plead down or dropped by the DA. No convictions. Because the DA knows they're garbage paper, Maya said flatly. Exactly. The kid is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The only reason he hasn't been flagged yet is because his activity numbers look great to the patrol sergeants. He writes a lot of tickets. He makes a lot of noise. Maya rubbed her eyes with her free hand. The texture of her skin felt dry and papery. He thought I was a petty larceny suspect today, Tom. Made up the call on the spot. Jesus, Gregory muttered a curse. He's an idiot. But he's an idiot with a union card and a loaded gun. I've initiated the formal IA review. He's suspended without pay, pending the outcome. But you know how this plays out, Maya. The union is going to fight tooth and nail. They'll call it a training deficiency. They'll say he needs retraining, not termination. I don't care what they call it, Maya said, her voice hardening, the cold clinical chief creeping back into her tone. I want him gone, Tom. I want his certification pulled so he can't just drive 2 counties over and put another uniform on. I'll build the strongest case I can, Gregory promised. But brace yourself. The rep assigned to this is Peterson. Maya grimaced. Peterson was a bulldog, a man who viewed every disciplinary action as a personal attack on the Brotherhood. Understood, Maya said. Have the preliminary reports on my desk by 700 tomorrow. Will do. Get some rest, Maya. She hung up and dropped the phone onto the cushion beside her. The room was getting darker, the shadows stretching and bleeding together. She sat in the silence, listening to the hum of the fridge, feeling the monumental crushing weight of the machine she was supposed to be driving. The precinct smelled exactly the same at 7 a.m. as it did at midnight. It was a deeply ingrained institutional odor, a nauseating blend of industrial bleach, burnt coffee, stale sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of ozone from the overworked copy machines. Maya stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor. The transition was jarring. The The worn linoleum of the lower levels gave way to thick, sound-dampening blue carpet. The chaotic din of holding cells and shift changes vanished, replaced by the hushed, sterile quiet of administration. She wore her Class A uniform today. The wool trousers scratched slightly against her legs. The stiff-tailored collar of the shirt pressed against her neck. The 4 gold stars pinned to her lapels felt unusually heavy, cold pieces of metal that dug into her skin when she moved too quickly. It was armor, and today she needed it. She bypassed the outer administrative desks, nodding curtly to her assistant, and pushed open the heavy mahogany door to her office. The space was large and imposing, dominated by a massive wooden desk and a wall of windows looking out over the city skyline. The sky was a bruised, overcast grey, promising rain that would turn the summer heat into a suffocating steam room. A thick manila folder was sitting precisely in the center of her desk blotter. Gregory's preliminary report. Maya didn't sit down. She stood over the desk, unbuttoned her suit jacket, and flipped the folder open. The top page was a still frame from Miller's body camera, taken 3 weeks ago. It showed a teenage boy, Hispanic, pinned against a chain-link fence, his face contorted in pain as Miller's forearm pressed into his neck. The boy's hands were visibly empty. The report below it detailed the charge disorderly conduct. Case dismissed by the judge 2 days later. She turned the page. Another frame. An older white man clearly unhoused his few possessions, scattered across the sidewalk while Miller stood over him, one hand resting casually on his taser. Maya's jaw clenched. The throbbing behind her right eye, which had subsided during the night, began to pulse a slow, steady rhythm. A sharp knock on the doorframe pulled her attention away from the files. Lieutenant Peterson stood in the doorway. He was a stocky man with a ruddy complexion and thinning hair combed carefully over his scalp. He wore his Union Rep pin proudly on his lapel. He smelled strongly of drugstore aftershave, a sharp, alcohol-heavy scent that cut through the stale air of the office. "Chief," Peterson said. His tone was respectful, but his eyes were hard, calculating. He wasn't here to apologize. He was here to negotiate. "Come in, Peterson," Maya said, finally, walking around the desk and taking her seat in the high-backed leather chair. It squeaked in protest. She didn't offer him a seat. Peterson stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him to ensure privacy. He walked to the center of the room, stopping just short of her desk. He glanced at the open file, recognizing the IA forms immediately. "I wanted to get ahead of this Miller situation." Peterson began folding his hands in front of his belt. "I spoke with the kid last night. He's a wreck chief, completely beside himself." "I imagine he is," Maya said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She closed the manila folder and rested her hands flat on top of it. "It's a terrifying thing to realize your actions have consequences." Peterson shifted his weight. He made a mistake. A monumental, stupid mistake. But he's 24 years old. He's got 18 months on the job. He's still green. He fabricated a suspect description to establish false probable cause. Maya corrected her voice, rising slightly. He initiated an illegal detention. He laid hands on a civilian without provocation. That's not green, Peterson. That's criminal. Peterson held up a hand, a placating gesture that only irritated her further. "I'm not excusing the procedural error, Chief, but you know the reality of the 4th Precinct. It's a high-stress zone. The kid is out there dealing with the worst of the worst every single day. He got tunnel vision. He saw a violation jaywalking, and he approached it with too much heat. He thought..." Peterson hesitated, navigating the minefield carefully. He didn't realize who he was dealing with. Maya stared at him. The sheer audacity of the argument, presented so casually in her own office, was staggering. "Let me stop you right there," Maya said, leaning forward, resting her forearms on the desk. "Because that is the second time I have heard that exact phrase in less than 24 hours, and it makes me sick to my stomach." Peterson blinked, thrown off by the sudden intensity. He didn't realize who he was dealing with. Maya repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Meaning if I was anyone else, his behavior would have been acceptable. Meaning that respect, constitutional rights, and basic human dignity are only afforded to those who carry a gold shield in their pocket." "That's not what I'm saying, Chief." Peterson counted his ruddy face, flushing a deeper shade of red. "I'm saying context matters. He made a bad call under pressure. He was standing in an empty intersection in Westbridge on a Tuesday afternoon." Maya snapped, the anger finally cracking through her professional veneer. There was no pressure. There was no threat. There was only a young man with a badge who decided he wanted to bully someone because he thought he could get away with it. She tapped her index finger hard against the manila folder. "I have read his file, Peterson. I have seen the body cam stills. He targets people he believes are powerless. He manufactures friction. He is a liability. He needs retraining." Peterson insisted, his voice hardening, adopting the inflexible stance of the Union Wall. "A 30-day suspension, loss of vacation days, and mandatory de-escalation courses. You fire him for this, Chief, and we will take it to arbitration. We will drag this out, and the arbitrator will look at his clean service record, because he hasn't been written up before this, and they will give him his job back. You know how the machine works." Maya sat back in her chair. The leather squeaked again. She looked at Peterson not with anger, but with a profound, desolate weariness. He was right. That was the most sickening part of all. He was absolutely right. The bureaucratic machine was built to protect itself, to insulate the institution from the consequences of its own failures. Firing Miller would be a monumental legal battle, consuming hundreds of hours and thousands of taxpayer dollars. And there was a very real chance a civilian arbitrator would overturn it. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as it was designed to. "I know exactly how the machine works, Peterson," Maya said quietly. She looked down at the closed folder. The cardboard felt rough beneath her fingertips. "And I know that right now, that machine is sitting in the back of my precinct, chewing up the very people it's supposed to protect." She looked back up at him, her dark eyes utterly devoid of compromise. "Tell your lawyers to start drafting their appeals," Maya said, her voice dropping to a cold, flat register. "Because I am walking down to IA, I am signing the termination papers, and I am personally sending his file to the district attorney's office to explore false imprisonment charges. If he wants his badge back, he's going to have to bleed for it. Get out of my office." The heavy mahogany door clicked shut, cutting off the sound of Peterson's retreating footsteps. Maya stood alone in the center of her office. The silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the drop in barometric pressure right before a severe thunderstorm tears the roof off a house. She walked to the coat tree in the corner, retrieved her uniform cover, and tucked it under her left arm. The brass brim felt cold against her ribs. She didn't look at the city skyline as she left. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, navigating the thick blue carpet until she reached the service elevator. She bypassed the main bank. She didn't want to see the patrol sergeants or the detectives nursing their lukewarm coffees. She wanted the utilitarian grease-stained metal of the freight car. She pressed the down button. It lit up with a dull, flickering yellow glow. The descent to the basement was a slow, groaning, mechanical process. The gears ground together, a physical manifestation of the bureaucratic friction she was about to initiate. The basement level was entirely different from the executive suite. The air down here was stagnant, smelling of floor wax, damp cinder block, and the distinct sour odor of anxiety. This was where internal affairs lived. It was a windowless labyrinth of frosted glass and cheap, buzzing fluorescent lights. Captain Gregory's door was cracked open. Maya pushed it wide. The office was cramped, the walls lined with towering grey filing cabinets that held the worst secrets of the department. Gregory was sitting behind a metal desk, rubbing his temples. A thick cloud of vapour from his e-cigarette hung in the air, smelling faintly of artificial cherry and nicotine. He looked up as Maya walked in. He didn't say a word. He just opened the top drawer of his desk, pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper, and slid it across the scratched metal surface. Form 4A. Notice of immediate administrative separation. Maya picked up a cheap plastic ballpoint pen from Gregory's desk organizer. She didn't hesitate. She didn't read the boilerplate legal text. She pressed the nib against the signature line. The ballpoint was dry, at first scratching a sharp, invisible groove into the paper, before the blue ink suddenly flowed. She signed her name. Maya Brooks, Chief of Police. It took exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of friction against paper to dismantle a man's livelihood, his identity, and his immediate future. Peterson was just in my office. Maya said, her voice dry. She tossed the pen back into the cup. It clattered loudly. Gregory sighed a long, rough sound. Let me guess. The kid got tunnel vision. He needs a hug and a refresher course on the Constitution. Word for word, Maya muttered. Send the file to the district attorney's office before lunch, Tom. Flag it for the Public Integrity Unit. The DA is going to drag his feet, Maya. It's an election year. He doesn't want to go to war with the police union over a jaywalking stop that escalated. I know, she said, resting her knuckles on the edge of the desk. But make him put it in writing. Make him put his name on the declination. If the machine is going to protect this kid, I want a paper trail showing exactly who pulled the levers. Gregory nodded slowly, pulling the Form 4A back toward him. It's going to get ugly, Chief. Peterson is going to leak this to the press as a political hit job. They'll say you're anti-police. A humorless, dark chuckle scraped the back of Maya's throat. She gestured to the 4 gold stars on her collar. Let them say whatever they want, Tom. I've got a city to run. She turned and walked out of the IA office, her boots clicking sharply against the cheap linoleum. She navigated the narrow corridors heading toward the rear exit that spilled out into the employee parking garage. As she rounded the final corner near the basement locker rooms, she stopped. Sitting on a long, scarred wooden bench was Miller. He was out of uniform. He wore a plain grey t-shirt, faded blue jeans, and a pair of beat-up canvas sneakers. A brown cardboard box sat on the floor between his feet. A rolled-up duty belt stripped of its holster, and radio was crammed into the box next to a half-empty pack of spearmint gum and a plastic protein shaker. Without the crisp polyester, the heavy leather, and the brass shield, he didn't look like a threat. He looked like a frightened college kid waiting outside the principal's office. Miller looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, the skin around them swollen and blotchy. He saw the gold stars on her collar, the rigid posture, the absolute authority radiating from her tailored uniform. He stood up, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He wiped his palms on his jeans. "Chief," he croaked. His voice was completely broken. Maya didn't move toward him. She stood 10 feet away, letting the physical distance mirror the professional chasm between them. Miller swallowed hard, looking down at the cardboard box, then back up at her. "I wanted to be a cop since I was 10 years old. My dad was on the job in the next county over. I wanted to help people. The raw, desperate plea hung in the fluorescent light. A younger, more naive version of Maya might have tried to find the lesson in this, might have offered some stern but maternal wisdom about redemption. But the 48-year-old woman with aching knees and a throbbing headache didn't have the energy for television-scripted platitudes. "You didn't want to help people, Miller," Maya said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly empty. "You wanted to command them. You wanted the respect of the badge without earning the weight of it. There is a profound difference, and until you learn it, you have no business wearing the uniform." Miller's jaw trembled. He looked away, staring hard at the cinder-block wall as if trying to memorize the texture of the grey paint. He had no defense left. He was completely, utterly hollowed out. Maya didn't wait for a response. She adjusted the cover under her arm, turned on her heel, and pushed through the heavy metal fire door leading to the garage. The heat of the day had finally broken violently. The sky beyond the concrete overhang of the parking structure was a bruised, churning charcoal. Rain was coming down in sheets, heavy fat drops that hammered against the pavement with a deafening roar. The smell of petrichor wet dust oil and hot concrete flooded Maya's senses, thick and suffocating. She stood just inside the lip of the garage, watching the water wash over the city. A cold mist blew inward, dampening the wool of her trousers. The drop in pressure made her knee ache with a sudden, vicious spike of pain. She had won the battle. Miller was gone. But as she watched the rain violently scrubbing the grime off the streets, she felt the grinding reality of the war ahead. Tomorrow, the Union would file the grievance. Tomorrow, the press would start calling. Tomorrow, another rookie would roll out of the academy full of ego and bad instincts and step onto the pavement. Maya pulled her uniform cover from under her arm and settled it onto her head, adjusting the brim low over